Well, before I jump into it, I'm Ken Pelham. I live in Maitland, which is a little bedroom community just north of Orlando. And I've dabbled in lots of types of writing, but I always circle back to suspense and mystery and thrillers. As I said, I've dabbled in other things, horror, science fiction, mainstream fiction, all sorts of things. And I love writing nonfiction too. I've written a number of articles and a couple of books. So let me see if I can open the presentation here. Okay, can everyone see that?
Yes.
Okay. And let me go to, okay. All right, so Great Danger. This is all about building suspense. As I mentioned, I always circle back to mystery and suspense fiction. It's what I like to read most and what I write most. But I think you'll find that a lot of the things that we'll talk about today, I'll be focusing on a lot of examples from those genres, but most of this will apply to all sorts of writing, including nonfiction. So we'll just jump right in. Suspense, what is it? Well, Merriam-Webster says it's a noun, feeling or state of nervousness or excitement caused by wondering what will happen. So based on that, it's a form of uncertainty. It's all related back to fear. Now, and people say, oh, fear is bad, don't fear anything. Well, that's not true. Fear is good. It keeps us alive. It's how we managed to survive as a species for thousands of years. And fear is a natural response to harmful external stimuli. Typically, you all heard that it's fight or flight response when you're in trouble and in danger. Either response can triggers a whole cocktail of chemicals in your body. So, for example, if you come face to face with a saber tooth, you're gonna be afraid, very afraid. It may not keep you alive, but it gives you a fighting chance. And the advice I have on here is and run, which is probably terrible advice since most large cats react to things that run, and that triggers a predatory response. So the best thing is to just ball up into a little ball and pretend you're dead, I guess. The anatomy of fear. I'm not going to read all the details of this, but it's all, if you see in the upper right of the figure there, starts with the amygdala and the hypothalamus in the brain, which is right there in the lower central part of the brain, which is, as you might expect, the most prehistoric, primitive part of our brains that goes back to basically all creatures. And then the larger outer lobes, what involve reason and abstract thought, things like that make us human. But at their most basic core, we're all dinosaurs basically. So that triggers when you're in trouble. It unleashes a whole cocktail of things that go on in your body. It triggers your pupils dilate, thyroid gland rises in metabolism. You're taking more oxygen. All sorts of things kick in. Um, and it's basically there to keep you alive. Now, there's paradoxes with suspense. Why do we enjoy that uncertainty and fear? And I've read a lot of different articles on why this happens. If you're truly in danger, you're not going to be enjoying it, but we can enjoy it as fiction. And a lot of psychologists have addressed this, and they would come up with different terms: entertained uncertainty, desire frustration theory, moment by moment forgetting, allows you to move on, and emotional misidentification. That's what one psychologist came up with. He said basically it's not fear that we're experiencing, we're just misidentifying anticipation for suspense. So whatever they come up with, I'm good with. But I've shown you an image from the poster of Apollo 13 here. I must have seen it 10 times, and every time I'm on the edge of my seat hoping they'll survive. When I know that they all do. I remember when it happened as an event back in the early 70s. But yeah, it's an amazing movie because they employ all the important parts of building and maintaining suspense throughout. Now, Alfred Hitchcock, the original master of suspense in film, he has this important thing to say. There's a distinct difference between suspense and surprise, and you'll see in a lot of his movies. there's not a whole lot of slam bang action that goes on. It's all building things up through suspense. Let's suppose that there is a bomb underneath this table between us. Nothing happens, and then all of a sudden, boom, there's an explosion. The public is surprised, but prior to this surprise, it has seen an absolutely ordinary scene of no special consequence. Now, take a suspense situation. The bomb is underneath the table, and the public knows it because they have seen the anarchists place it there. The public is aware the bomb is going to explode at 1 o'clock, and there is a clock in the decor. The public can see that it is 1:45. The same innocuous conversation becomes fascinating because the public is now participating in the scene. The audience is longing to warn the characters on the screen, you shouldn't be talking about such trivial matters. There's a bomb underneath you and it's about to explode. So in the first case, we have 15 seconds of surprise at the moment of the explosion. In the second, we have 15 minutes of suspense. The conclusion is that whenever possible, the public must be informed. So that's his secret to his movies. And I'll show you an example later on of how he does that. As I mentioned in my preamble, the techniques of suspense apply to not just fiction. They'll also work in nonfiction. So these are some of my favorite nonfiction books. The Hot Zone in the Heart of the Sea, which is the tragedy of the whale ship Essex, Midnight in the Garden of Good and Evil, Monster of Florence, and there's a dozen more that I've read that are equally suspenseful. I just finished reading The Boys in the Boat, which is about the University of Washington shell crew in 1936 that won the Olympics. And they tell you that right off the start, but it is an amazing book and keeps you on the edge of your seat the whole ways. Creating suspense. Okay, the way I do it is I have a laboratory with a suspense machine, and it's just kidding. Moving on. All right, so how we do it is we studied the masters. These are just a few examples of people that do it very well, have done it very well. Dashiell Hammett and the Maltese Falcon, Da Vinci Code by Dan Brown. Stephen King has done it in lots of books. Gone Girl, more recent example, Gillian Flynn. Eye of the Needle, which I think is still Ken Follett's best novel. He might disagree, but it was his first big hit. They all use the techniques that I'm going to go into here. And by the way, if anybody has questions, feel free to ask as we go along. I'm not above stopping, and also if the hosts, if I'm running over, want to give me the hook at any time, that's well too. All right, first thing to do is research, and this applies to all writing, writing a fiction, because getting it wrong interrupts momentum and the spell is broken if you get it wrong. And you can fool 95% of the people 95% of the time, but there's always those readers that are going to pick up on errors, and it bumps them out of the story. And you should try to, satisfy every reader that you get. So the things that help you are the library is your friend, a recognized expert is your friend, experience is your friend, travel is a big friend. The internet is your friend that you can't trust, and your friends can't be trusted. Everyone thinks they're an expert, but you need to, if it's technical knowledge, you need to back it up with your own research to verify. Trust but verify. That's the old adage from the Cold War days. Some of the books on my shelf, this I use specifically for a lot of my mystery and suspense. These are all put out by Publisher's Digest. Armed and Dangerous, a writer's guide to weapons. Forensics, a guide for writers. Book of Poisons, a guide for writers. And Police Procedure and Investigation. I think of all these, my favorites is Book of Poisons. And, sometimes I'll be reading that late at night. And my wife keeps glancing over at me thinking, well, what's he up to? Forensics, you'll notice the writer of that is D.P. Lyle. He's a best-selling author also. So he is obviously well versed in those things. The principles of writing, yes.
Question there. The books that you were showing, are those like just generally available at a library or?
They're all available, probably at the library. They're all available on Amazon. I guess you could check with your library and see if they carry copies, but they're all worth having, certainly.
Okay, thank you.
I've referred to all of them for my work. The first thing, I've written a book on writing and viewpoint. I'm always surprised when I talk to, well, not anymore. When I present it to new writers, they're confused about what point of view and viewpoint is and why it matters so much. Because it's the easiest way to, to knock people right out of your readers right out of your story. So, and one thing that you can do in trying to build a structure, suspense into the structure of what you're writing is begin with the viewpoint. You need to figure out what works best for the type of story that you want to tell. Mystery stories, for example, are often told in the first person or in third person limited, and third person limited is, of course, um, limited to one person's point of view. So it almost reads like first person. And the advantage of this in a mystery is it allows the writer to keep the identity of the evildoer secret, allows the protagonist to suspect everyone, as in The Maltese Falcon. Sam Spade is the protagonist, and it's in third person limited. So he's able to evaluate the motives and the characters of all the other people in the story. Thrillers they differ from that, and they're often told in multiple third person, sometimes in first person, sometimes in limited, but often in multiple third person. And the advantage of that is in a lot of thrillers, commercial thrillers, you'll have multiple characters, and each one has got an agenda and a subplot, so they're all doing all these things simultaneously. So the large cast allows for a speed of narration and keeps things flowing and popping. The large cast allows for speed of narration and objectives that are at odds with each other. So these are things that you might want to consider when you're trying to map out the structure of your novel. Start with the viewpoint. What's going to work best in this? And again, you can check on your favorite books in those genres and try and figure out why they chose a certain viewpoint. A good example is Sherlock Holmes by Arthur Conan Doyle. They're actually narrated by Dr. Watson, and you would think, well, why did he do that? Well, because he wanted to create a character, Sherlock Holmes, who had this untouchable knowledge and mind. He didn't want the reader to be able to get inside that mind. He wanted it all from the point of view from someone observing what Sherlock Holmes does. Because if he let us, I mean, if he's that untouchable and that unknowable, we can't actually get inside his mind. So it's best being told from a different angle. Start strong. Always in almost every fiction, you want to start strong. It's very important, in particular at thrillers, but also in other mystery and suspense types. So at the very gate, you want to get to the action. You don't want to beat around the bush very much. You want to introduce your protagonist right away. You want to challenge her. As an alternate, you might set up something grim for a lesser character, such as in Da Vinci Code. It follows Robert Langdon throughout the whole book. However, it does not open with him. It opens with a character who is murdered in the Louvre, and the whole first chapter is involving that. So it gets it off and running like that, and then Robert Langdon is brought in the next chapter. So these are not hard and fast rules. There's always different ways to skin a cat and get these things going, but these are some things that I've picked up over the years. Killer openings, back to that, starting strong. If you can, get that killer opening in the very first line, and here's some that I think really stand out. In Travis McGee's, the Travis McGee series by John D. MacDonald, who actually is from your area, the Suncoast. He lived and wrote mostly in Sarasota. One of his Travis McGee novels, I think it might have been the first. We were about to give up and call it a night when someone dropped the girl off the bridge. Now, there's a lot packed into that sentence. As you read the next few sentences, you realize that he and his pal are out fishing in Florida Keys under a bridge there, and then suddenly a girl strapped to a stone comes plummeting down in the water. So this story is off and running in the very first paragraph. Another favorite of mine is, they threw me off the hay truck about noon. From the postman always rings twice. It also says a lot about the first person narrator in there. He's obviously a drifter. He gets thrown off, for probably acting up. So you already get a glimpse into his character right off the bat, and it really gets the story up and running. Create protagonists we really care about. Character is plot, and of course Harry Potter and his whole gang of friends. They're all put in great danger in every book in the series, and we really want them to succeed. And of course, they're children. That's even something we care more about So they struggle through as they grow through different trials and tribulations, both at school and with the greater evil that is trying to get rid of Harry. So you want to build characters you really care about. Now, sometimes I say things like this that contradict what I also said, because in The Postman Always Rings Twice, none of the characters are particularly people that you'd want to make friends with. They all are deceitful, despicable, all have their very own angles. Sometimes they try to do right, but you care about them in a different way, but they're not people that you come to love. Create for flawed protagonists, and people sometimes don't like it when I say this, but Superman is super boring, but Batman is not. When Superman the comic was first created, and gosh, what was that in the 1930s? They quickly realized, gosh, this guy can pick up buildings and circle the globe, and bullets bounce off him. He had nothing that was a danger to him. So, they quickly realized, oh, we need something. So they came up with kryptonite. Oh, yeah, that'll be his weak point. But, it's just like, come on, he's too good. He's not susceptible. Batman, on the other hand, is just a human with a lot of toys and gadgets. So he can get hurt just like the rest of us. Protagonist flaws. Back to Sherlock Holmes. His flaw was he was obsessive and he was a drug addict. And they, didn't really interfere with his work, but sometimes they would waylay him for a while. Sam Spade in Maltese Falcon. He's callous about his partner, and he's also a womanizer. So he's got his dark side too. Hercule Poirot, he's vain to the point of being annoying. His fastidiousness fits into that. But Special Agent Pendergrass in the novels by Douglas Preston and Lincoln Child, he's comes from a very unusual, very wealthy background, and he's really uncomfortable with contact with other people and human closeness. He just can't open up to people, but he is like a Sherlock Holmes type of character. So they've all got their flaws, and that's a good thing. Create complex victims. Antagonists need complexities too, otherwise they just become cardboard. I mentioned Eye of the Needle, Ken Follett's novel. The main character in it is Faber, and he goes by the name, his code name. He's a German agent in wartime Britain. D. Noddle, that's his code name for the needle. He's a remorseless killer, but he only does it in service to his country. He believes that what he is doing is right, and he doesn't go out of his way to create harm to other people. But if someone interferes with his mission, he'll kill them, in the wink of an eye, although he doesn't necessarily enjoy it. So he's, it's fairly complex, ultimately a bad guy, but, in his eyes, he's not. And I think most bad guys would see themselves that way too. Less is more. Too much action and violence, I find to be boring. I see a lot of movies these days where it's slam bang action from the moment the movie starts till the time it ends, and I just come away with a headache. There's not much pause between scenes in a lot of these things now. So a lot of people disagree with that, but I think the pacing is going downhill in a lot of films and in a lot of novels. More is more. Eventually, however, you got to deliver the goods and get to the action, so you can't pause forever and make it a long, slow slog. Okay, some of my favorite techniques are compress the timeline. So stories which take place within a short span of time tend to have heightened tension. I've written novels or stories where I, spaced out over quite a bit of time. Then in revisions, I said, I'm going to cut this back to, half the time or a quarter of the time. So then it builds in a little into the structure of the story, a little tension. Now you've got something going on there, and you have to address it quickly. Start the clock is related to that. So if you introduce a timeline or a deadline, you let events race the clock. It's a common device in a lot of thrillers. In other words, you can now you've got a deadline. Things have to happen by that time, and it's stated up front usually. And stated or unstated such that the princess must be rescued and whisked to the palace before the shoemakers hanged for murder at noon. Okay, she has a novelist's deadline to that's got to be worked out here. An unstated one is in the relic, my Preston and Child that I mentioned. Gruesome murders take place in the Natural History Museum in New York, and it's just days ahead of their annual gala event. It's a big fundraiser with all the big muckety mucks in New York City will be there, all the powerful politicians and rich patrons of the museum. So there's a definitely uh, mention stated that this is looming in the future. They don't give exactly the time pace it's taking, but then it arrives quicker than everybody imagines, and murders are still occurring. Been time and space. With Einstein proved it can be done. It's not the same thing I'm talking about here, but don't waste time on unimportant passages. They take a lot of your time, but they shouldn't take a lot of the time in your fiction. For example, you drive to Orlando International, you check your bags, you board, you wait, you fly to Atlanta, you wait, you catch another connecting flight, you arrive at Heathrow Airport in London the next day after 18 hours of travel. Um, that should be not spelled out in great detail unless something of note happens, like something on the flight or something like that is going on. You want to give this as little shrift as possible and maybe skip it all entirely and just go straight to the next scene, as opposed to you arrive at Heathrow, the gunfight breaks out at Heathrow baggage claim and rages for 2 minutes. Now, you can milk that for 5 pages, 8 pages, as long as you want. Just scroll into great detail. You don't want to waste your time getting there. You want to get to the action and spell it out. And it can be dragged out to much more than 2 minutes. It doesn't have to be real time. You just want to get it in detail and specifics. Vary the pace. In music, soft passages heighten the impact of the big numbers. And I mentioned in the pacing of a lot of movies now, there's not much pacing in my opinion anymore. But in music, you can see this in a well-composed piece of music. It's all about the contrast and pacing. The same should be true in storytelling. The reader needs a chance to catch breath once in a while. So you can speed it up, you can slow it down, you can build it slowly. Write short. Vary sentence length and paragraph length. You don't want, and this applies to all writing, you don't want every sentence to be 14 words long. It'll get repetitive in a hurry. Actually, it'll be repetitive by the next sentence. So you want to vary sentence structure, paragraph structure, but something I find that works well is highlighting action and building tension with short paragraphs and short sentences. And you can vary those as you get closer to the important points you want to make. Now, this is a line from one of my short stories, Wreck of the Edinburgh Cape. And what's happening in this story, it takes place in the late 19th century in a barrier island, a fictional island I created north of where you are, up in the Big Bend area, just near Cedar Key. And Brigand's Key has a history of um, looting, smuggling, things like that, and looting of ships when they, and making a payday if a ship runs aground. This is common in Key West and other places around Florida at the time. So a ship runs aground, the Edinburgh Cape runs aground just offshore. And so, it just creates a lot of excitement in the town. And immediately a dozen small boats are launched to get out there and sack the ship. In accordance with what was allowed by law at that time. They had to then report it and split up some of it. But, it's a real payday for a place like that. So as they get onto the ship, I wanted to highlight as we got close to one point. They have searched the ship. They haven't found a living soul on it, so they think everyone is dead. And then, so I jump in here in the middle. Amid the clutter, orderliness caught his eye. A stack of clothes, folded neatly, sat underneath the stairs, bound together with twine. Sanborn stooped to inspect the clothes. Despite the neat, almost fussy folds, the clothes were grimy, typical of a seaman's clothes, infrequently washed. He realized that none of the skeletons they'd found had even a tatter of clothing amid the bones. Each had been stripped. He led the group deeper into the hold, searching first the 4 rooms, the sick bay, and the crew's mess, and working their way slowly aft. 2 more skeletons laid in the midshipman's berth, again with the cut marks of the butchery. At last they reached the captain's cabin. Sanborn pushed open the door. More disarray. Another skeleton lay in a dark, wet corner. The skeleton slowly turned to face him. So what I was trying to do was get to that point, and then there's a scene break immediately after that. So what you'll see is I start with a longer sentence of 44 words, 22 words, 24 words, 15 words, 12 words, 10 words, and 7 words. So that allows me to highlight things and just build a little bit of tension as it sort of descends in directness, or directness actually ascends, the number of words descends. So that's something you can't go to this well with every page. I mean, you pick and choose wisely the way you want to do something like this, but it really helps highlight what's going on in the story. Stretch the suspense. Now we're going to take a little video break here from Alfred Hitchcock that I mentioned before and how he likes to build suspense. So this is from The Birds. Let's see if this works. Okay, and to start the scene, this is birds have already started attacking the little island of the little town of Bodega Bay, and not very many people are aware of it. But Tippi Hedren, the actress, her character, has already been attacked and has seen what is coming. Let's see. This is I'm trying to expand this. Okay. Can anyone hear that?
Can't hear it and can't see it.
No. Unfortunately, no.
No.
Are you
You don't see
building our
it?
suspense, Ken?
All right, I'm going to try and. Beg your pardon?
Are you building our suspense?
Yeah, I'm building the suspense. All right.
Thank you.
All right. So this is a big failure. Let me. All right. What's that? If you haven't seen The Birds, watch it. That's where the scene where the children are singing in the classroom, and Tippi Hedren's character is waiting nervously for them to stop, and meanwhile, birds start flocking together all around. All right, write short chapters. A gimmick that works quite well in things like thrillers. Most other forms will have longer chapters, but things where they're really trying to move pace along, you'll see very short chapters occur quite a bit. But however, don't overdo it. You don't want to narrow it down to where there's too many one-page chapters that can really get old in a hurry. So, but it's a good trick if you ready to do that. In all chapters or scenes on cliffhangers. Well, not necessarily. And this is a picture from The Man from U.N.C.L.E. Some of you may remember, and they ended an episode like this, to be continued. Okay, it's a little bit not fair, but it works in written fiction. It doesn't necessarily have to be a cliffhanger, but a hook of some sort, a revelation, a question, a twist, a plot turn, pithy quote, a conflict, a new conflict. So you just want to make your reader say, maybe I'll just hang on a few more pages tonight and then move on. So that's always a good gimmick to rely on. And this is a gimmick employed here in my book, Brigand's Key, which I mentioned in a short story also. This is the novel Brigand's Key. And the way the one chapter ends, Grant gripped the lamp and pointed downward. He's diving out down to find out, in the face of an oncoming storm at night. So he was in a small boat, but he been given this directive that you need to find what's happening out there and do it now, else, your girlfriend dies. So Grant gripped the lamp and pointed downward. All he could see was blackness, a peculiar clear blackness, with flecks of white drifting and surging through. The primeval gut fear of the unknown ran through him. Blackness, water with no bottom. Down he went, fighting the current, sweeping all directions with the beam of his lamp. The slope came into view. To his right, the craggy limestone plunged into the depths at 45 degrees. Sea fans clung to it, waving in the currents, and sponges and urchins gave it an otherworldly beauty, brilliantly colored, shadowed in the glow of the lamp. He followed it downward, 40, 50, 60 feet, equalizing the pressure in his head, 70, and then he saw it. He stared in disbelief, forgetting to breathe. So, and that's the end of the chapter. And then there's a couple more chapters before we get back to what he's actually seeing. So it's a little trick to keep people turning the pages. Foreshadowing. This applies, I think, to all types of fiction, and it's very important. People that really do it well, turn it into a masterpiece sometimes. Foreshadowing is the art of hinting at things that are coming. Maybe in an action, a thought, a speech, prophecy, opinion, metaphor, symbolism. Build suspense by letting the reader know that something is coming, something looms in the story. Now, a lot of stories, science fiction, horror, fantasy, you're asking your reader to suspend disbelief, of things that they know aren't so. So for a story that asks a reader to suspend disbelief, foreshadowing is very important and can be really used well. You can subtly introduce concepts so that the reader is ready and accepting when they arrive. If the story features action or tension that takes some time to develop, foreshadowing provides suspense to get you there. And just as an example, somewhere in the story, maybe in the opening, you could see winter came early and hard that year. It would be Admiral Velikovsky's last. And then you've kind of dropped that the Admiral is in trouble at some point. And this could happen, at the end of the book. But you've put that in there, and now people have that in the back of their mind. Uh-oh, I need to keep reading this, find out why it's his last. Write dialogue that crackles. And I'm not going to attempt it again. This was a clip from the Gorky Park, the movie based on the novel by Martin Cruz Smith. But if you haven't seen it, it's really worth watching just for the dialogue in the movie. There's so much in this particular scene that goes unsaid, but the characters are sort of doing a little a dance around each other. The police inspector, the Soviet inspector, is investigating the deaths of 3 people, including an American in Gorky Park, and his intuition tells him that this American exporter, a very rich man, is connected to it. So he keeps sort of dropping these hints, and they just keep dancing around the issue. And eventually, without saying so much, the American is saying, "You can do this," and yeah, I did it, but you're never going to catch me. You're not smart enough, and none of that's ever said out. But it's pretty obvious what's going on. It's really good stuff. So throw in a little sexual tension if things start to bog down. Will they or won't they? And the difference here, I said throw in a little sexual tension, not sex. There's a big difference. Sex is, again, the action that Hitchcock was alluding to. Bang, something happens. It's the sexual tension that drives the story along. And Rhett and Scarlett, for 2/3 of the movie, that was, what's going to happen between these two. So will they or won't they? Back in the 70s, the early 70s, all of a sudden it became all the rage to have graphic sex scenes in every novel. And, I read a number of them. I was thinking, oh, this is exciting. This is fun. But after 3 or 4 novels, you think, okay, I'm starting to skip through those and just get back to the story. It seems like they became gratuitous. And after a while, novelists got away from doing that, thankfully. But yeah, it seemed to bring the stories to a screeching halt. Throw in a body, and I wish this was a mystery writer that wrote this. If things starting to drag in the middle of your book, throw in a body. And I can't recall who said that, but that was his point. If the plot begins to settle down and snag or slow down, and you're having trouble coming up with something new, kill someone off. Do it. Throw in a big surprise as we inch closer to solving the mystery. Make it something unexpected. So, yeah, our favorite mysteries, we think we know what's going on, then all of a sudden they throw a twist at us. Ah, okay, well, that makes sense, but it's not what I expected. You threw me off there, and that's some good writing. Throw in the little complications. And this works really well in a lot of fiction. As protagonist struggles through a tense scene, all of a sudden, things are bad enough already, but then the doorknob gets stuck, the floorboard creaks, the computer crashes, anything, those little annoyances that we have every day. If you're in a tense situation when there's danger, that could happen, that you're in danger of some sort, you can make it worse just by throwing in those little complications that just aggravate and annoy us during the day. I mean, during a regular day, but if they happen in a situation like that, it's infinitely worse. Twist and shout. Keep the protagonist and the readers off balance. Solve the problem, but have it lead to another. So give them a little successes. You can dangle that carrot in front of them and let them have it once in a while, but only if unless you're at the climax, you want to either snatch it away or have it lead to another problem. Introduce us to our worst nightmares. Common phobias. These are things that, there's a lot more phobias than these, but fear of heights, fear of snakes, spiders, arachnophobia, close spaces, claustrophobia, blood, darkness, flying, drowning. My fear is not flying, by the way. My fear is that the plane is not flying. So drowning, being eaten, and clowns. Believe it or not, I hear that all the time, but some people have a real fear of clowns. And then an even better one, I think, would be being eaten by clowns in the dark. Now we've got 3 we can throw into one story. So if you can give us a character, when we talked about flawed characters and their weaknesses, if they have some of these, one of my characters has got claustrophobia, so I put him in dark tunnels just for the hell of it. Make him work through that. So to weigh in on that, if he has a fear of heights, make him rescue his girlfriend from atop a communications tower in a lightning storm. If she hates her drunken, abusive mother, make her rescue her kidnapped, drunken, abusive mother. If he once killed a kid in an auto accident while dozing at the wheel, force him to stay up 3 nights while driving a busload of school children through the Andes. So you play on people's their past, their weaknesses, their perceived failures in the past, and those are the worst nightmares, their phobias that they have. It's another way of just adding another layer of tension and suspense to a story. Bad is good and worse is better. You ever had a clip of Mae West and she said, I was really good last night. And she said, oh, you were great. You were wonderful. She said, I'm bad, but I'm better when I'm worse, or something like that. So active verbs, active sentences. You want to kill in all types of writing. You want to get rid of the passive verbs as much as you can. Is, are, was, were, and leave them to 15% as a rule of thumb, maybe even more. If you can eliminate all, that's great. Sometimes that passive verb just sounds right. It was the best of times. It was the worst of times. Opening line, opening paragraph of Tale of Two Cities, and it's one of the most well remembered because it just fits, even though he's loaded it up with passive verbs. Avoid negative sentence structure, and that's when we're saying things that not or no, things like that based on that. We don't care what happened. We don't care about not what didn't happen. So the rabbit did not run slowly. That's a negative sentence structure. The way to do that properly, and that's an extreme, absurd example. The rabbit ran fast. You just want to make sure that you're not dropping a lot of knots, even though sometimes they sound clever in your mind. It doesn't propel the story along. You want to avoid that if you can. Murder your little darlings. I'm not talking about the characters. I'm not talking about all your precious phrases. Brevity is your friend. You want to, if they don't propel the story along, a lot of extra description. Some description goes a long way. I would make it as concise as possible. Get bang for your buck and not overburden a story with it. I've read some stories where, in describing a character. There'd be 2 pages of physical description of a character, and it's like, I'm good with 2 or 3 sentences at the most, describing a character. And then your mind fills in all the blanks, so you come up with a character that works. So long descriptions of the environment, the settings, the characters can really slow things down. Always create tension because conflict is story. I would say, if you can, strive for conflict in every scene. On the same side, they could be on the same side, both good guys, but they don't have to always agree on everything. Conflict can be subtle and understated. Don't be nice, be heartless, be a monster to your perfect family and perfect characters. That's what's going to create tension and put the story in action. Conflict's not always between characters. It can be between protagonists and that squeaky hinge on the door, or with nature, storms, things like that, or internal, conflicts. There's always ways to build tension in conflict, and without conflict, there's really no story. I read a gentleman read one of my novels and gave it a great review, and he asked me if I would read his draft and comment on it and give him a review. And so I said, sure, send it on. About 2/3 of the way through, I gave up. I couldn't read it anymore. Everybody was so nice to each other. Nothing ever happened. You'd thinking, all right, something's going to happen here. No, somebody helps him out. He's like, you gotta pick a conflict sooner or later, but it never did. Create inner conflict. Okay, give your protagonist difficult, if not impossible, choices. As in Casablanca, make the cynical bar owner send the love of his life back to her husband. Make the private eye turn in the woman he's falling for, as in the Maltese Falcon. Make the young mother choose between her 2 children, which to save from the death camp in Sophie's Choice. Make the POW blow up his beloved bridge that he spent months working on building. It becomes a thing of pride to him. Make him blow it up just so that the enemy can't use it. And it really, these are some great examples from movies. Make the climax truly the climax. You don't want to, real life sometimes in a breaking story, things happen right away, and then there's all the explanation and resolution after the fact. That doesn't work so well in fiction, in storytelling. You don't want to resolve major dramatic points too soon. You want to, build points. You can solve points as you go, but the major dramatic point has to be near the end. If they overshadow the climax, those earlier things disappoint your reader. Now, let's write a scene. So I'm going to just throw a scenario out here. Caroline needs evidence to help free her husband from the Gestapo. So maybe in a first draft, you write, Caroline found the empty warehouse. She glanced about, opened the door, and entered. There in the corner was a file cabinet. She opened it, found a file labeled June 1936. She rifled through the sheets and located the list of names and dates she needed. She left the warehouse and hurried back to her car. Okay, well that, resolution, that's basically a whole scene right into itself, but it's not terribly interesting. So if I go back to all those different things that, I talked about, start the clock, compress the timeline, stretch the suspense, kill the passive verbs. When good happens, follow it with bad. When bad happens, follow it with worse. But offer glimpses of hope as you go. Shorten sentences and paragraphs. Reintroduce her to her nightmares. Throw in complications. And end on a cliffhanger. So we're going to do our next draft, trying to accomplish these things. Caroline slipped inside the empty, dark warehouse. She moved softly, measuring her steps. Outside, rain fell, masking the sound of her movements. She glanced at her watch. In 7 minutes, the guard would make his rounds. Okay, now we've got the clock ticking here. She found the file cabinet, tried it. It resisted, squeaking in protest. She pulled harder. The lock held. She spotted a pile of debris, selected a rusty piece of steel, jimmied it into the edge of the file drawer, and leaned hard into the steel. The cabinet sprang open with a loud snap. She glanced at her watch. 4 minutes left. Still plenty of time. She rifled through files and found one labeled July 1936. She withdrew a list of names and dates and turned to go. The rain stopped. A soft sound, a crunch barely audible from outside. Footsteps. A yellow glow flickered through a crack in the door. Caroline caught her breath. The guard had begun his rounds early. He rattled the latch, eased open the door, shone his flashlight inside. Caroline cast about, desperately searching for another exit. Blank walls lined the interior. She looked up. 8 feet above the floor, a glint of light marked a broken window, slightly ajar. A way out. She ran to it, jumped and caught hold of the sill and pulled herself up. A shard of glass fell from the sill and stabbed her forearm and shattered to the floor. Caroline gasped, clawed the air, fell. A low growl rumbled across the floor. She twisted toward toward it. The Doberman strained at its leash, broke free, and raced toward her. Caroline scrambled to her feet, slipped and in her own blood, and crashed again to the floor. Wrenching pain seized her knee. No chance of outrunning the Doberman. She felt about, found the shard of glass, spun, and slashed out at the Doberman as it slammed into her. And scene. Okay, so breaking that down, Caroline slipped into the dark warehouse. In 7 minutes, the guard would make his round. I'm just pointing out those things, the little tricks that I slipped into it. It resisted, squeaking in protest. She pulled harder. The lock held. Snap, broke up in the cabinet with a loud snap. 4 minutes left. Now the timeline is getting more critical. The rain stopped. It was her friend before because it was masking her sounds. Now it's not. A soft sound, a crunch, barely audible from outside. The guard had begun his rounds early. Uh-oh. Even the shortened timeline is no longer good. So he's already there. A way out. She got a glimpse of hope. All right, there's the way out of here. I can do this. I can do this. She tried. A shard of glass fell into the sill, stabbed her forearm, and shattered to the floor. A low growl rumbled across the floor. Here's one of those phobias, being eaten or torn to bits by a wild animal. A Doberman. She slipped in her own blood. Okay. She scrambled to her feet, slipped in her own blood. Now, complications are piling up. If you slipped in a puddle, at your house, it's usually not a big idea, not a big problem. Wrenching pain seized her knee. Wow. Okay. Now she's, torn her knee up, and we don't give you the outcome. We end it on a cliffhanger. So you're now bound, if I've done my job, to go on to the next scene. So in conclusion, you want to build suspense into the very structure of the story, and you want to plan it out carefully to do that, into point of view, into the characters, how you're going to design your characters, into the details, into the paragraphs, the structures of the sentences, and into the words, and even into the words that aren't used, as in the good dialogue. So that can be part of the structure. And that is the end of it. So if there are any comments or tomatoes, feel free.
Any comments, everyone? That was great, Ken.
Thank you.
Bill?
Yeah, I enjoyed it very much. I had a lot to learn there. I did have a question, as far as you were talking about, well, you made a comment about modern audiences have a short attention span. And you said, write short sentences, short paragraphs. How many, and short chapters too, is one of the things. How many words are in your average novel, and how many words per chapter are you writing, do you think?
Well, again, this is where you want to, depending on the type of novel you want to write. Most thrillers are between 75,000 and 120,000 words.
Yeah.
I think mine have usually been about 85,000. So right in the middle of that. Mysteries, whodunits, like an Agatha Christie, they tend to be shorter. I would say 55 to 70,000. In short, brevity, is being short does not equal bad. Some people say, "Oh, why would you want to read something as short as The Postman Always Rings Twice?" Well, because it's fantastic.
Yeah.
That's why. And that's probably less than 50,000 words. I don't know the actual word count, but it's very short. Now, fantasy novels tend to be longer. I would say 120,000 words and above for a lot of fantasy novels. Science fiction seems to be in that 75 to 100,000 range. And these are, approximate. So there's obviously going to be outliers that are shorter or longer. Romance, I think, is usually between 55 and 65. thousand. Um,
How about
So,
your
yeah.
chapters? When you get to that chapter level, are you writing like 2,000 word chapters or?
probably around 2000. And when I was talking about varying the length in thrillers, what I see is the longer chapters up front, and then as the story paces, as you get closer toward the middle and the end, all of a sudden they start to become shorter, and then the climax, the chapters or pages are flying by like that intentionally. They're and almost in a lot of thrillers, almost everyone ends on, if there's multiple characters, flips over to a different character. So you're always wanting to see what happens next to that character. I got to read somebody else's chapter now. Um, the pacing is different in mysteries, whodunits and things like that. Um, there's not necessarily a long climax. Thrillers have a long climax. I think in a lot of whodunit mysteries, there's cozy mysteries, things like that, a lot of buildup, and then the climax is resolved very quickly at the end. So there's, again, it varies from genre to genre, is what readers expect and prefer. And some things just work better in different genres than in others. But yeah, I would say the majority of my chapters are between 2,000 to 3,000 words. Um, and again, shortening up as they get closer to the end.
Okay. Yeah, I'm in a book club, and once a month we meet, and everybody's always talking about wanting to read shorter books. So it kind of goes into that modern
Yeah.
audience that you were talking about with that short span. So I don't know if I agree with that development in our society or not, but it is what it is, right?
Well, I wrote one novel, and when I finished the first draft, it was 120,000 words. When I whittled it down through multiple drafts, it was more like 85,000 at the end. So I cut a lot of it out,
Yeah.
and I realized, oh, this is chaff here. I want the wheat only, So, cutting out a lot of exposition that wasn't necessary to the story helped it a lot, in my opinion.
Okay. Thank you.
Yes.
Martin, you're on mute, Martin. Take it. You're on mute. Okay. There we go.
There. I want to thank you very much for that presentation. It
Thank you.
really took all the clothes off of writing fiction and then put them back on. And I've got a question though, that maybe you can give me an answer to. When I lived in the Keys as a marine biologist for 30 years, and
Everybody wanted your life, by the way.
pardon?
Everybody wanted your life.
Well, yeah, actually, it was a lot more work than it sounded like.
Yeah.
But I'm not going to get into that. One of the things that I did when I was there, I wrote a book for teenagers about diving, because one of the things that I wanted to do, the name of the book was Down Where Blood Bleeds Green, and I wanted to give them an understanding of what the problems were and the joys were of writing, diving, and a little bit of an experience on a fiction basis. It never sold very much because I never told anybody about it. But anyway, I'm curious as to what you would think about using fiction to be able to use as an instrument of education, as something that would, when you're through reading the book, you come away with not only the experience of having read the book, but also with a better understanding of something that was or that is important about their life, about things. And do you think fiction can be used in that way? And if so, what would be a way of going about it?
Well, I would say that story comes first, and I wouldn't attempt to write it as a treatise on scuba diving. I would write a story based, that involves a lot of scuba diving, and then provide your teaching there. But everything's got to be dedicated to moving that story along. Otherwise, people aren't going to be interested. Um, I've read some, I took scuba lessons to make sure that I knew what I was talking about, when I wrote Brig and Ski, because there's several diving scenes in it. So yeah, we would be an expert. So, when I talked about research, that's part of the research, knowing what you're doing. If you're not
Yeah.
gonna try it yourself, then you're taking a big risk. But I've read some books about sailing. I took sailing lessons so I could learn a little bit about it too.
Yeah.
But sailing old-timey ships, galleons and things like that, I've obviously never done that. But I've read some books where the author had clearly done enormous amounts of research, and you felt like you were really on these creaking old ships, swaying in the water, and kids up in the tops of the rigging, and the dangers of it. So I think all that can be conveyed in a very thoughtful and detail-oriented way, and that's going to impart the knowledge to it. You don't want somebody to just read about scuba diving and think they can go out and doing it without taking lessons, obviously. But yeah, you can. That would be the way to do it, and you would be the person to talk about marine biology and diving and the keys. That's an area of expertise.
Yeah, I think I did that, but I'm
Yeah.
I'm not sure.
Yeah.
I'll have to. I put it on Amazon, and it's been on Amazon for 20 years now.
Yeah.
But
I'll just make a little comment on marine biology. I've never been one. I've never played one on TV, but um, my oldest brother, he's a year ahead of me, getting out of high school, and he went to enrolled at college, and he had to make an appointment with the guidance counselor, and so he went in, and the guy said, "All right, so what is it you want to do?" And Robert said, "I want to be a marine biologist." And the guy says, "You too, huh?" His point was, okay, there's not many employment opportunities in it. So my brother became an engineer instead, but you were the lucky one. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, I was a senior fisheries biologist for the state for 10 years, and then I was a marine biologist
Yeah.
specializing in aquaculture for the rest of the time.
Any
Yeah.
other questions? Well,
Yeah,
Uh,
I have one. Oh,
oh,
Go
sure,
ahead.
Samantha?
yeah, I was curious. So everything that you said was great, and I feel like it's like super valuable information. I'm just curious, if you were to give advice to a writer, can it be interchangeable in terms of like setting the scene, setting the clock, suspense? I feel like you can put suspense in a romance novel, you can put suspense in horror and thriller. Do you feel like there's any advice to like fine tune the information you provided, or do you feel like it's kind of straightforward? If I were to say go write like a romance novel, and you kind of have to have that moment, right, where everything's hanging off the edge of the cliff, for lack of a better term. Do you think all of the information you provided could work for writing a novel like that, or is it strictly towards suspense?
I think in general terms, it applies to most writing. Some of these things are more geared towards suspense. Like you don't have to throw in a body if you're writing a romance, but
Yeah.
but shortening not wasting a lot of time on important things like checking your bags at OIA, on your dreadful flight to Heathrow. I just got back from there. um, that's just dull. It's not interesting. You want to cut all that out and find out unless something happened on that plane, like in Indiana Jones where the spy is watching him, that's important detail.
Yeah.
Um,
Okay.
right. But, shortening scenes, highlighting the action, making the dialogue, boring dialogue is where somebody asks a question and the other person answers it, and question after question, and it's all, no, don't do that. Just dance around things and leave a lot of things unstated,
Yeah.
and you'll have your favorite books of dialogue, and see how that's done. So,
Okay.
and do go watch Gorky Park, by the way.
Okay,
Yes, Ed.
Ed?
Yeah, Ken, thanks for an hour of pointing out everything I've done wrong. Seriously, I'm re-editing some of my older books, and which at the time I wrote them, I thought I did right, but obviously, and I have learned also since then how to do them better. But I have a problem with trying to uh, build build a book from the basement, and not start with the roof. So I tend to build more into the start of the book, which I'm not killing someone in the first paragraph or even probably in the first chapter, but I'm trying to do more of what you're suggesting here to gain interest and so forth. I'm using foreshadowing, things like that, but I've still got, like 60,000 words that just is not that effective. It's a decent story and leads to a better sequel and then on to another series, but it's vanilla, and I'm at a loss what to do as far as structure. Anything that you could suggest that would give it a little more oomph?
Yeah, and a lot depends on the genre. Stephen King writes mostly horror, and he has said many times that he never plots. He never works out a big detailed plot.
Yeah,
What
I
he
don't
does,
either.
what he does is he develops his characters as full as he can. He develops a premise, a scenario. This is the bad thing.
Right.
Whether it's a haunted house or whatever. And he just turns them loose and lets their character dictate the story. I've tried that, but with what I've written in mystery and suspense and thriller, there's certain things that have to happen in a certain sequence for it to make any sense at the end. So that didn't work for me. For everything that I write, I work out a 20-page outline or something like that. So that way I've ticked off all the things that happen to happen in the sequence. So it's different, I think, for mystery, thriller, and suspense than it is for horror.
Oh.
Work out, here's a big idea, that everything is based on. Probably can do with characters dictating the story as they fit into this universe or this idea. So there's not one size fits all, not a simple solution for that. I've tried different things that worked for me and didn't. For short stories, I've sometimes just come up with a premise like Stephen King and then came up with characters and then let it go because it's 10 or 20 pages.
Right.
But with the longer stuff, that didn't work for me.
Yeah, I tend to let the characters take over the story.
Yeah, and there's nothing wrong with that. Yeah.
Yeah, it's just that I don't feel as though I'm getting that really sharp start because I'm spending too much time in their lives.
Yeah.
And yet I look at it again and I say, wow, I can't cut this because if I do that, then this won't make any sense. It's somewhat of a dilemma. I'll just have to keep working on it.
And what I've also found with my novels is, as I said, I would plot them in great detail and then start writing, and moving things around as I go. But as I got close to the end, without fail, I've said, the ending that I wrote, I can do better. And I like it better if I did this instead of that. And I was very happy, with the changes. So, I would say I would be happy plotting 80% and then leaving 20% unresolved because I know I'll come up with something better as I go through. So.
Well, I tried to define thrillers and mysteries to myself in this way that I look at a thriller as, well, we know who the bad person is. All we got to do is catch him and kill him or whatever. Whereas a mystery, we're faced with clues. We got to solve the clues in order to find the person.
Right.
And that's kind of the premise that I always worked with, but I'm just spending a little too much time, searching, I guess.
Well, I don't think the Stephen King approach would work with a traditional mystery because, the clues all have to make sense. They're not it's not character driven. It's more like these points have been brought up. Now we have to resolve them. So,
Right, yeah, I'm all character driven. It's,
yeah.
yeah. Okay, thank you. And
Well,
thank
you're
you for
welcome.
your presentation.
And thank you for being here.
Other comments or questions? I want to talk about killing your darlings. When I first heard the concept of killing your darlings, I was so reluctant to it. I try and rewrite my story around what I liked. And of course that never worked. And then I met a teacher who said, oh, no, don't kill them. Take them and put them in a drawer and you can pull them out and use them
That's a
later.
good idea.
And I go, oh, that works. Then I don't feel like I've lost that forever. And it's actually worked. I actually have dragged some of them out of the drawer and they fit in another story somewhere else.
I've
And
got whole chapters from my novels that I've cut out, and they're in a drawer, but I never throw them away. I don't throw anything away because I know that that chapter will make a good short story someday,
yeah, that's
It's a lot
right.
of work, but yeah,
So if you have trouble killing your darlings,
yeah.
don't kill them. Just put them in a drawer.
Hide them in the attic like we all do.
And I really liked a lot of your hints and tips, especially how you highlighted how you integrated into your work. That was really interesting. And I learned something new about short paragraphs. I've always heard about to heighten the tension, like short sentences, but I didn't know about the short paragraphs. So I thought that
Well,
was
it's a
a really
it's
good
a
tip.
trick, and it's
Yeah.
it's not going to work throughout the whole thing, but
No.
that's why you want to pick and choose where you want to do it,
Yeah, and
where it makes
shorter
the most impact.
chapters. Yeah,
Yeah,
shorter chapters, shorter paragraphs. Ah,
right.
very good. Thank you. Um, okay, I think that was it. And your flawed protagonist, I also read that you should put something likable about your antagonist because no one's 100% good or 100% evil. So I go, oh, that's kind of like a new concept. But
Yeah.
your evil
Well, it's like
person needs a
D.
good side
Noddle,
to it.
D. Noddle in Eye of the Needle. As I mentioned, he's relentless in pursuit of his goal, but he doesn't see himself as evil, and he has empathy for this woman that the English woman that he's met on this island as he's trying to escape. He's sympathetic to her situation, but when it comes down to it, neither she nor anyone else is going to interfere with the success of his plan, even though he's developed an attachment to her. So, yeah.
Ruthless. Any other comments?
I have
Harry?
another quick, oh, sorry.
Harry,
I'll let Harry go.
you're on mute.
You're
Harry.
on mute,
Okay.
Harry.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Ken. I appreciate the organization of your presentation, especially and the progression of how to build the tension and it was really well presented and a lot of material. And thank goodness it's been recorded, so I don't have to take so many notes.
Also, this
Ah, yes. Thank you.
and my one on viewpoint.
Yep.
Ginny, oh, I'm sorry, Samantha?
Yeah, I had, this might be maybe more of a statement slash question, but as a young, as much as I don't like the term, but a young millennial, a lot of the reading that I'm subjected to it tends to be very commercial, more so these days, right? We have these authors that are kind of like pumping out these books. And I think it was Ed that had made mention to maybe struggling to like find how to make connections in his writing. And as a writer myself, like I tend to struggle with that too. And I'm curious where, as a writer, we kind of take a step back and just write to write and then go back and look through it, or kind of writing with purpose. A good example, I'm not sure if anybody's familiar with Colleen Hoover. She's kind of become insanely popular over the course of the last like year and a half or so, mostly due to social media. But her books are, I would say, quite juvenile, but they have substance and they're fun and like they're easy to get through. So again, like where, as writers, where do we kind of take that step back and saying like, okay, I have something I want to put on paper and I'm excited about it. I want it to be purposeful, but at the same time, like, should I just write, and then kind of go back and like look through it again, I guess. Obviously you go back and look through it regardless, but not putting so much pressure on yourself to kind of get the exact story on paper, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I've heard the advice and I tend to agree with it that, write what you want to read, what you would be a fan of reading. And there's always examples of people that are just writing for a paycheck, whether it's good fiction or, but I'm not one that to knock what other people are reading, particularly if I haven't read it. If I've read something and I think it's terrible, I'll say so. But to me, everyone has different tastes. And if you're reading a trashy novel, if that ultimately means that you're going to read All Quiet on the Western Front, that's a good thing. We all start somewhere. I know the author you're talking about or mentioned, but I've heard of her and that she is insanely popular, and it's just happened like that, and through social media sales and things like that. But I haven't read her work. Obviously people like it. So I'm not sure if there was an answer in what I just rattled on about to what you were asking, but
No, you did. I get that. At
okay.
some point, no, I agree. It tends to be personal at a certain point, and you have
Yeah.
to kind of write, like you said, write what you would want to read. I think that's
Right.
great advice.
And my advice, since I mentioned, it's probably the worst. I like to read in a lot of genres, and I like to write in a lot of genres. That's probably the worst career advice I could give anyone. The people that are successful, pick one and stick to it. Ken
Yeah.
Follett writes thrillers, and that's all he does. So, but I can't do that. I still want to read and write other things. So,
Of course.
yeah.
Any other comments? Samantha, I think it depends on your goals. Like, do you want to make your living as a writer, or do you just want to learn the craft itself? Or, that would sort of steer you in which direction you wanted to go.
Yeah, definitely.
Ginny? You're on mute, Ginny. You're on mute. There we go.
I wanted to thank you for the presentation. I started a detective novel years and years ago that I put aside, but after listening, it's kind of given me some ideas to maybe go back in my files and find it, because it was very informative, and it's motivated me a little bit. And haven't been motivated much lately, but I'm grateful. Thank you.
You're welcome. My first novel, I've been writing a long time. My first novel, I had all these great ideas for, and I thought, I'm going to be like Kurt Vonnegut. This is going to be my Kurt Vonnegut novel. And I wrote 120 pages and wrote myself into a corner. So I put that all aside and started all over again. And this time I finished it, and it was horrible. So I thought, why am I trying to sound like Kurt Vonnegut? I'm not Kurt Vonnegut. So then I worked through all those things, So it's still sitting in a drawer, and there's parts of it that like I said, I might make into short stories, but no one ever is going to see the whole novel again because it's that bad.
Yeah, but think of how much you learn doing it. Yeah.
You learn a lot. Yeah.
Yeah.
You have to keep doing it. Yeah.
I also learned that what I thought I was going to write when I decided to become a writer is not what I ended up writing. And when I stopped fighting against that and just allowed it to flow, it was so much better. Yeah, actually made progress. Yeah. Any other comments before we close for the day? Well, Ken, thank you so much. That was a wonderful presentation. We learned a lot of new tips and hints, especially on the construction of your novel. And we're absolutely thrilled that you came and seen us today and gave us the speech. So I'll hand it back to Bill to close out the meeting.
Oh,
Thank you.
Well, I would like to add one little thing.
Sure.
If anybody's going to the Florida Writers Association conference, it's in a couple of weeks.
I'll be
It's
at
up
the-
here in Orlando. I've got a presentation I'm doing at that on finding and using low-cost graphics for your work, for whatever purpose you want to use it for, without breaking the bank and without breaking the law of copyright. So I'll be doing that if anyone's there. So
oh, that
Alrighty
sounds
then.
great. Steal that one there, Gloria. I'd love to
Yeah.
see that.
Well, I only paid for the banquet, so
Oh,
I won't be able to sneak in.
I want to say thank you too, and just to echo Jenny, it's a lot of ideas percolating around, and it's certainly an inspiration and motivation to get back to the keyboard and start working again. So thank you, Ken. Appreciate it very much. Very informative.
thank you.
And with that, I guess we'll bring the meeting to a close. Samantha, I hope you come back and join. And it's always educational. And thank everybody for showing up today. And I guess we'll see Long Riders in a week, and then 2 weeks we'll have our readers workshop here. So, all right, everybody, have a great rest of your weekend. Okay.
Right. Thanks, Bill.
Thank you so much, everyone. Appreciate it.
Okay. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.